Hello, my fellow geekazoids and freakanoinks. Your friendly Aquazord storyteller here with another etc. Well, I'm sure you know the rest because you're a fan of my animated storyteller channel where I use exaggerated voices. In order to make it clear that something interesting happened to me during the 10 minutes a month when I'm not at home creating content for my animated storyteller channel. And that was one of my exaggerated voices. Anyway, if you've never been here before, I'm Brinley. If you know me, you know I love fan-generated content featuring corporate-owned intellectual properties. Whether it's looking at pictures of what my favorite corporate-owned intellectual properties would look like as anthropomorphic animals, or writing my own fan fictions about what would happen if my favorite corporate-owned intellectual properties became anthropomorphic animals, there's nothing I enjoy more than participating in communities by creating content based on corporate-owned intellectual properties. But when you've mastered fan content like I have, you sometimes consider making content featuring your own original characters. The problem is, I am a storyteller, and the first rule of storytelling is that the story has to be real, because otherwise people could just make up random and awkward things that happen to them, which is against the animated storyteller's code. So I decided to participate in someone else's story, and that's when I found out about the web-based collective fiction known as SCP. Basically, anyone can create a character and then place it in the world of SCP, which stands for Some Characters Please, as they need creative users like me to upload profiles of new characters all the time. I figured this would be a chance to get myself involved in a new fandom where I could go to conventions and have more of my fellow introverts come up to me and tell me how talented I am. Like at the Maryland Animated Storyteller Con 2018, where after I told someone I had my own animated storyteller channel, they said cool and politely declined my request to give them my autograph. Of course, the secret to making great fandom content is to be an expert on the subject you're making the content about, so I decided to read some of the profiles of the other characters on the SCP Wiki website. In the dark! Big mistake! These profiles are so scary. Like this one I saw that was about a spooky chair. I was so scared reading these user-generated descriptions of spooky characters that I was only able to make it through a few thousand of them. And the more I read, the spookier they got, because I kept forgetting I was reading a collective fiction project and thought I was reading real declassified documents about spooky chairs and stuff. Once I felt like I had read enough, I decided to create my own SCP. The way SCP works is, you write a description of your character following a lot of rules or something, I don't know. This might be fine for your average person with no experience in fandom content creation. But for someone like me who has created so many great OCs before, it would be a waste of time. Like, look at this one. I call it Majumble. It's a human that was bitten by a radioactive spider and swings around town shooting webs out of its hands. In fact, Majumble is such a good OC that I decided to make it an SCP. Now, first I had to pick out the class of SCP my cryptid would belong to, such as Euclid, Thaumiel, etc. I mean, I'm sure we all know them. Anyway, I didn't like any of those classes, so I made up my own. It's called Majumble class, which is a class of well-known intellectual properties that swing around town shooting spider webs. I wrote out a description of the character, uploaded my illustration, and I even wrote a little interview portion like you see in these posts.
What is the name of your SCP?
Majumble.
And what is it?
A humanoid that was bitten by a radioactive spider and swings around town shooting spider webs.
That's so scary.
I couldn't wait to see how the SCP community reacted to my new scary character. My only worry was that it would become so popular that I would be mobbed by fans at the next SCP fandom convention, which is a nightmare for introverts like me. A few hours after posting my character in the official SCP forum, however, well, yeah, this happened.
This is just Spider-Man? Page be deleted. Mods, can you please delete?
I refreshed the page to see if there had been some sort of mistake, but no, my brilliant OC SCP had been deleted. That's right, Majumble Beeble, an OC that I had been working on for years and knew was one of the best OCs ever, somehow wasn't good enough for this stupid website? Ugh, I felt awful. Did they delete Majumble Beeble from their collective fiction website because I was bad at creating original characters? Fortunately for me, I had another great OC in my back pocket. Majumble Beeble 2. I quickly wrote up my SCP brief for Majumble Beeble 2, starting with a very spooky interview.
What is the name of your SCP?
Majumble Beeble 2.
Can you describe it?
He's a happy mouse with big ears that talks in a high voice.
Ah, that's such a good SCP. Ah, the mods should make that character of the week. Ah.
Before uploading Majumble Beeble 2, I made sure to go to the grocery store and get lots of supplies because I knew I was going to be mobbed by people recognizing me on the street as the creator of Majumble Beeble 2. And in fact, when I was at the store, someone kept staring at me and looking at their phone. I figured they must be such a fan of my work that they had seen Majumble Beeble 1 and were going to ask me if there was going to be a Majumble Beeble 2. So we were just like staring at each other and it was, can you say awkward sauce? Finally, I just took a picture of the two of us together and ran home to write about the awkward exchange and record what you are hearing now so I could extend the time of this animated storyteller video. Then, I went to upload my new SCP. But instead of Majumble Beeble 2 being hailed as the scariest SCP ever, I got a notice that I had been banned? I mean, really? The creator of Majumble Beeble 2 isn't good enough for your stupid collective fiction website? I sat down at my computer to write an angry note to the mod team. Dear mods, you have made a terrible mistake. Ah, what the fudge are you?
I'm an SCP that's a scary chair.
Ah!
I'm gonna zap you with my laser powers.
No, please don't. Is there anything I can do to stop you?
Yeah. You can write a profile of me on the SCP Collective Fiction website and make it really scary.
I can't upload any new SCPs to the SCP website because I was banned?
Then I'm going to zap you.
Not so fast! I am Majumble Beeble.
And that's when I realized the reason Majumble Beeble was deleted from the SCP Wiki wasn't because it wasn't an OC. It's because SCP is collective fiction, and Majumble Beeble is fact. I just so happened to be so creative that I accidentally came up with a character that actually exists in real life. And if you think that's crazy, the next day, I went to the grocery store again, and I thought someone recognized me and wanted my autograph, but actually they thought I worked there and wanted to know where to find the hot dogs. And that's why they said, "Where are the hot dogs?" and not, "Can I have your autograph?" Ah, what the f*** are you?
I am Majumble Beeble 2.